We're going to be favored by a selection by Ms. Denton. That will be followed by an introduction of the keynote speaker, and then we'll be hearing from the person of the hour.
If I can do
For young people in the room who never met Martin Luther King Jr., never had any experience with him, for young people who only know Dr. King based on footage or what they read in the newspaper, it's often wonder, how do you capture who Dr. King was? When you lived on a certain era, as some of us have, and we've seen remarkable people come this way. As a young man, I watched Muhammad Ali as a boxer. Saw all of the various phases in his life he went through. And one day, as will happen in everybody's life, his life came to an end. And millions of people tuned in to listen to the eulogies and the remarks of Muhammad Ali. And as I listened to these speakers, one a former president of the United States, another an actor by the name of Billy Crystal, who could imitate Muhammad Ali well. I listened to all of the speakers, and then a speaker took the microphone, one that you will hear from tonight. Having lived during the era of Muhammad Ali, having knew what he meant to me and to so many others, I wondered, could anybody capture who he was and why he was so significant? And our speaker, not only did he capture him, but I've talked to many people who watched that entire funeral procession. They said no one captured who Muhammad Ali was better than our keynote speaker. No one. And so for people who look at Martin Luther King Jr. today, those who lived during that era, those who experienced his words, we are delighted this evening to have the president of Simmons College from Kentucky writing the address. He's the senior pastor of St. Stephen's Church. But more importantly, as you will find out, he's a man that understands who Dr. King was and what Dr. King means now and to future generations. Please join me in bringing to the podium our keynote speaker of the evening, the Reverend Dr. Kevin W. Cosby.
Thank you so much, Brother Carl, to the dais, and to all of you who are lovers of justice and freedom, all of us who have been the recipients of a selfless, sacrificial life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Prior to his emergence, we were not the United States, we were the United Hates. Our mascot was not the eagle, but it was the vulture. But Dr. King stood up and helped to build where there was walls. He dismantled the walls and used them to build a bridge of reconciliation. And his shadow was cast throughout the global community. At Tiananmen Square, when Chinese students were seeking freedom from the oppressive regime of the Chinese government, they were singing "We Shall Overcome." There in South Africa, when Nelson Mandela was imprisoned in Robben Island, on his wall was a picture of two men, Muhammad Ali, because Nelson Mandela was himself a boxer, but also there was an image of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And when the Berlin Wall came tumbling down, those who were there celebrating the event were singing "We Shall Overcome." And Dr. King did all of this before he was 40, and during the course of just 13 years. not how long you live, it's how well you live. It's not your duration, but it's your donation that makes the difference. And what a donation Dr. King made to all of us. There's always a great danger when we celebrate Dr. King, because we have housebroken him. We have domesticated Dr. King. We have made him safe. The king, the mythological king that so many people celebrate, is at variance with the historical Martin Luther King. The historical king was not popular. That is the revisionist king that we celebrate, a revisionist king. He wasn't popular. You know, he wasn't the pitch man. The Martin King and Burger King is not the same. In fact, the last year of his life, and I wish that we could do something beginning April the 4th, the day King was assassinated, because next year, in fact, we should start across this country on April the 4th and journey to April the 4th, 1968. Next year, we'll commemorate the 50th anniversary of the martyrdom of Dr. King. 50 years. Next year, April the 4th, 1968. I would suggest, though, that we begin April the 4th this year and have 365 days of MLK. Why? Because April the 4th, 1967 was the beginning of the end of Dr. Martin Luther King. Because April the 4th, 1967, Dr. King stood up at the Riverside Church in New York City and denounced the Vietnam War. And as a result of his denunciation of the Vietnam War, because he wanted to be consistent, he said it's impossible for us to advocate for nonviolence in Birmingham and then say nothing about violence in Vietnam. It is just as egregious to bomb 4 little girls, kill 4 little girls at the 16th Avenue Baptist Church in Birmingham as it is to napalm little girls in Vietnam. And when he made that statement and that decision to move outside civil rights to become a global citizen, Dr. King was written off by the Johnson administration. He received no more invitations to the White House. The leading black media outlets denounced Dr. King. Carl Rowan denounced Dr. King. NAACP, Roy Wilkins, the Urban League, and Young, and even Thurgood Marshall, and the Jackie Robinson. All of them denounced Martin Luther King Jr. because, in fact, his popularity was so low that he was a depressed man. But he did it because Dr. King was a man of conscience and a man of conviction. He had what all good people need if they're going to change the world. He had moral courage. The courage of convictions. He said, and I quote, "I will not make my decisions on what I will stand for or against on the basis of how it will affect the budget of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference." Because sometimes leaders will lower their voices in order to raise their budgets. And it's important that we have moral courage. I remember when I was in elementary school, there was a bully in our school who just kept on thumping me in the head and tripping me, and thumping me in the head and tripping me. I wouldn't say anything. It was the bully of the class, thumping me in the head and tripping me. So I went home one day after being tripped, and I told my dad about it. He said, "Kevin, you need courage. If you do not stand up to the bully, then it will continue and other people will treat you the same way. Stand up." I went back the following day after my father's conversation to school, and I went and I told that girl that she would never thump me in the head and trip me again. I'm trying to tell you, sometimes you gotta stand up. You know? I'd like to share a word with you, and forgive me for my use of, as a preacher, of a verse in the Bible you probably have never heard. Never. And I'm using this because I think it helps give us an agenda. In fact, my message is to the black community and lovers of the black community, which has always been conscientious whites. And we would not be, as a community, who we are and what we are if it were not for the Clarence Jordans and the Viola Luenzos and the William Lloyd Garrisons and the John Browns. But this message is for the black community and our allies. And I'm entitling this message, "The Black Community Thriving in a World of Donald Trump." And there is a passage in the Bible in which I guarantee you, you probably have heard no preacher preach on, because it's weird. But once I unpack it, it may become, as it has become for me, one of your favorite stories and favorite metaphors in the entire Bible. And it comes from the mystical pen, the mystical apocryphal journal of a prophet named Ezekiel. I'm sure his friends call him Zeke. But Brother Ezekiel says this in the 47th chapter of Ezekiel. This is apocryphal. It's not going to make sense when you hear it. And it's not going to make sense when I read it, because it's not supposed to make sense. It's coded language. It's insider language. We are outsiders, but we're going to get on the inside to see what he's trying to say. And it is so relevant for us today. It reads, "And he brought me back unto the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house was towards the east. And the waters came down from under the right side of the house on the south of the altar. Then he brought me out by way of the gate northward, and led me round by the way without unto the outer gate by way of the gate that looketh towards the east. And behold, there ran out on the waters on the right side. When the man went forth eastward with the line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he caused me to pass through the waters. Waters that were to my ankles. Again, he measured 1,000, caused me to pass through the waters. Waters were to my knees. And he measured 1,000 and caused me to pass through the waters, and the waters were to my waist. Afterwards, he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass through, For the waters were risen, the waters to swim in, waters that could not be passed through. And he said unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen this? And he brought me and caused me to return to the bank of the river. Now when I had returned, behold, upon the bank of the river were many trees on one side and the other. Then said he unto me, These waters issue forth towards the eastern region, shall go down to Arabah, and shall go towards the Dead Sea. Into the Dead Sea shall the waters go, which were to issue forth, and the waters shall be healed. And it shall come to pass that every living creature that swarmeth in every place, whither the river comes, shall live. And there shall be very great multitude of fish, for these waters are come thither. And the waters of the sea shall be healed, and everything shall live whithersoever the river goeth. And it came to pass that fishermen shall stand by it from Engaddi, and in Eglam shall be a place for the spreading of nets. Their fish shall be after their kind, as the fish of the Mediterranean Sea, exceedingly many. But the miry places thereof and the marshes thereof shall not be healed, and they shall be given unto salt. And by the river, upon the bank thereof, on this side and on the other side, shall grow every tree for food, whose leaf shall not wither, neither shall the fruit thereof fail. It shall bring forth new fruit every month, because the waters thereof issued out of the sanctuary, and the fruit thereof shall be for food, and leaf thereof shall be for the healing of the nations. Wow. And by the way, what I just read, for those of you who are Sunday school students, that is also the last chapter in the Bible, Revelation chapter 22. What I just read is also repeated in the last chapter. Winston Churchill, perhaps one of the greatest leaders to ever stand up in human history, during the dark days of World War II, when Hitler's Luftwaffe was blitzkrieging cities in England like London, Winston Churchill said this. He said, everything that I had been taught to believe was permanent has not lasted. And everything I was taught to believe was impossible has happened. Winston Churchill had a way of using words. John F. Kennedy said of Winston Churchill that he mobilized the English language and sent it into war against Hitler. Again, Churchill said, everything I had been taught to believe was permanent has not lasted. Everything that I had taught to believe was impossible has happened. And in a sense, Churchill said during the dark days of World War II, captures the mood and the ethos of many in the black community today on the eve of the Trump inauguration. Many of the things that we assumed would be permanent, not lasting. And everything that we thought would be impossible, like Trump becoming president, has happened. His Churchillian mood has captured the mood of Black America. We ponder, we ask, how is it possible that a fraudulent businessman with no political experience, who dishonors women, who mocks the physically challenged, who is unapologetically a birther racist, who loves Russian dictators who happen to be war criminals, could become president of the United States? We're still trying to process this, almost like grief. And you go through stages of grief. when you're trying to process it. I don't think it is fully, we are fully absorbed what the election of Donald Trump means. What will happen to our country? Where is the world headed? What about the gains of blacks in America? Understandable anxiety about Trump. And that is the reason why I love the Bible. What a wonderful book is the Bible. It is called the book of life because it's the book of life. It speaks what life speaks. And there are no experiences that we will have in life in which we will not find in the pages of the Bible some parallel or some counterpoint. Consider this guy named Ezekiel. He lived through a time that is similar to the time that we're living with in today. Nothing that, everything that he had been taught would be permanent, did not last. The thing that he had been taught is impossible, in fact happened. Ezekiel was a refugee. He was a prisoner of war to the Babylonian Empire under the Saddam Hussein of the day, Nebuchadnezzar. Ezekiel's little country of Judah and his little city of Jerusalem had experienced defeat from the Babylonian war machine. The Babylonians had invaded Jerusalem and had burned down their villages, had raped their women, had murdered their children, and then herded them, the people, the Jerusalemites, herded them like cattle into forced migration into Babylon. Everything that Ezekiel knew was gone, had passed away. The old world, his old world was gone, wiped out, and now Ezekiel and his colleagues are slaves to the Babylonians. In the midst of this social upheaval stood Ezekiel. He is the preeminent prophet of the Jewish exile. He brooded over the people's predicament. He analyzed their plight. He sat where they sat and marked out a strategy, not simply for their survival, but for their thrival. We don't read Ezekiel much because he speaks in cryptology. He speaks in coded language. He speaks in symbols and metaphors and apocryphal language because he's a prisoner of war, and prisoners of war communicate in coded language so their oppressor cannot understand them. Black people have done that for centuries, even during slavery. According to the great historian Miles Mark Fisher, black people use spirituals to speak to each other in coded language. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water, God gonna trouble the water. That was not about baptism. That was coded, cryptic language, apocryphal language. It was instruction to runaways that if you're going to run away, then find some water and wade in the water, because the bloodhounds cannot pick up your scent if you wade in the water. They didn't understand why the bloodhounds couldn't pick up the scent, so they just said, God just troubled the water. That's coded language that only the inside community understood, and that's what Ezekiel did, spoken coded language. Language like dry bones in a valley getting up. Bleached dry bones coming together. Coded language. Coded language like I saw a wheel And there were wheels inside the wheels and wheels inside the wheels. Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of there. What does that mean? That's coded, cryptic language to communicate to the oppressed community. And here he goes again with some of these metaphorical, apocryphal type of images in order to communicate to the oppressed. And he says, you know what I saw? He said, I know we're in bondage. I know Nebuchadnezzar's in the White House. But let me tell you what I saw. He said, I saw a temple, a house of worship. I saw a church. And inside the church, there was a little water that started pouring in the church. And before I knew it, the water seeping out underneath the doors of the church. And then it poured down into the desert, and then emptied into the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because it's dead. It has 30% mineral and salt, and nothing lives in the Dead Sea, 10 miles wide, and nothing, no fish at all live in it. He said, but when the water that came from the temple, from the house of God, seeped underneath the doors of the church, that the desert got irrigated, and trees started popping up in dry, barren places. So that fruit was on the tree that grew every month, and leaves grew on the tree that was for the healing of the nation. And the Dead Sea came alive with aquatic fish, so that fishermen were setting up businesses around the Dead Sea, engaged in commerce and mercantilism, because water was coming underneath the doors of the temple. Now, I've seen water in my own church come out from our temple, and that's because the custodian forgot to cut off the valve. But somehow I don't think that this is what Ezekiel is talking about. He's trying to communicate something to oppress people when you don't have friends in high places. When you're oppressed and Nebuchadnezzar is in charge of public policy, he's saying, this is what you need to remember. He said, I saw water in the temple, in the church, in the house of worship, that seeped outside the church and irrigated and brought a life to barren desert places. Now, I want you to see something about this metaphor. Let's take it from back then and bring it to the right now. Let's take it from the Dead Sea and bring it to this community. I want you to see, first of all, the source of the water. And then I want you to see the course, the direction, the course of the water. And then I want you to see the force of the water. The source of the water, the course of the water, and the force of the water. First of all, consider, if you will, the source of the water. This water started in the house of God. It started in the church. It started in the temple. And the water, when it left the temple, revitalized barren places. But it started, the source of it was in the church. Now, if you're listening to Ezekiel, and if you're a contemporary of Ezekiel, and you're in bondage under Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, you know what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that the source, the starting point for revitalization in a barren community is not government. It's not Nebuchadnezzar. The source of it is the church. Now that's difficult for us to hear. But if you get it, it will help you to become emotionally stable, regardless of who is in the White House. Because while the White House is important for purposes of public policy, And Congress is important, and the Supreme Court is important. It is always important for black people to remember who our source is. Now, when I say who our ultimate source is, where it comes from, that by no means is designed to minimize the importance of political power and policy making. But we must always know the difference between a source and a resource. If you ever get in your head that your boss is your source, or your boo is your source, that's what's called idolatry. Those are, your job is not even your source. Those are resources. Now, it's understandable why black people can see who's in the White House or who's in Congress is our source. Because historically, one of the greatest allies that the black community has had, which many who don't believe, who are Jeffersonian and don't believe in big government and believe in smaller Jeffersonian types. The reason why you don't understand why black people love big government is because it has always been big government, or the federal government, and not local municipalities, that has advanced the rights of blacks. Big government did it. For example, it was big government that ended slavery. Federal government that ended slavery. It was the amendments that ended slavery, the 13th Amendment. It was the 14th Amendment that gave black people equal protection under the law. This is government. It was the 15th Amendment that gave black men the right to vote. Men. This is big government. So big government has always been our friend. Federal government has always been our friend. It was the Supreme Court that dismantled a Jim Crow, legalized de jure Jim Crow in this country. The Supreme Court did that. The Brown decision of '54, government in DC did that. It was big government that integrated the troops in 1948 with Harry S. Truman. It was Lyndon Baines Johnson and big government that was responsible for the Civil Rights Bill of '64 and the Voting Rights Bill of '65 and the Public Housing Bills of 1968. Big government has always been our friend. But as important as government has been for us, we must always remember that our real source as a people, as black people, has not been government. It has been the institutions that black people created and governed that was the source of our liberation and empowerment. It came out of the temple. The water came out of the temple. Gabriel Prosser was this black Samson that helped to dismantle slavery through insurrection. Denmark Vesey, we talk about Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, 1822. That's Denmark Vesey and the insurrection. Reverend Nat Turner, 1831. Harriet Tubman, who was an AME Zion, along with Frederick Douglass and AME Zion. It was the church, the temple. The water came out of the church. And not only when it comes to the liberation black people from slavery. That started, Lincoln was ambivalent about freeing the slaves. Lincoln was anti-slavery, but he was not pro-black. Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation as a war document in order to defeat Lee. It was not to free the slaves. It was a war document to dismantle the Confederacy. And that was pushed by a black man named Frederick Douglass. He pushed him, in the words of Jerome Bennett, he pushed him into glory. He's the one, a black man, church man, who said that you will not win the war unless you put armament in the hands of the freedmen. So they recruited former slaves, and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment was born with the jingle, let us rally, boys, let's rally, let us never mind the past. We got a hard road to travel, but our day is coming fast. For God is for the right, and we have no need to fear. The Union will be saved by the colored volunteers. By the colored volunteers, by the colored volunteers. And the Union will be saved by the colored volunteers. It was the church. The water didn't start from Nebuchadnezzar in the first place. It started in the church. And may I talk about black colleges and black universities? That was not started by the government. That water came from our churches, institutions like Livingstone and AME Zion School, or Morris Brown and AME School, or Morehouse, that was started in the basement of a church in Augusta, Georgia, or the HBCU that I'm the president of, Simmons College of Kentucky, that was started in the church of the Fifth Street Baptist Church. That was coming from the temple. The source of all that was the temple. The source of our somebodyness, the source of our pride, didn't come from DC, it didn't come from the White House, it came from our church. When we were tenant farmers and sharecroppers in those 13 southern states, when we were domestics and scrubbed other people's floors and ironed other people's clothes, and were not allowed the opportunity to go to universities. And when we had to deal with the indignity of seeing colored signs everywhere and restricted to the back of the bus, in which Dr. Martin King Jr. said the clouds of inferiority were floating through our mental skies. What gave us a sense of somebodyness? What made us put our head up and our shoulders back when we went to church? That's why we dressed up in church. We got dressed up because that was the only day we could wear a suit. That was the only day we could put on some hats and gloves. And then at church, we got a sense of somebodyness. The source was the church. Because at church, that tenant farmer and that domestic who was dishonored and disrespected during the week, you know what she became? She became president of the choir. President of the choir. Do you know what that farmer, that tenant farmer became? He became chairman of the deacon board. He became chairman of the trustee board. They call him boy during the week, but we call him chairman on Sunday. They call her girl during the week, but we call her Madam President on Sunday. And that was the source. That's where we learned how to give our speeches. That's why kids learn how to count. That's where we learned about who we were. The source of it was the church. Can I get real? You forgot, didn't you? You think that the civil rights movement we got started with Nebuchadnezzar, started in DC, started, the water started and poured out of the White House? No. In an inconspicuous place, of all places, the civil rights struggle did not start in government, with Congress, with the Supreme Court, or with Eisenhower. It started when an AME woman named Rosa Parks, who is an AME, was sitting on a bus thinking about the lynching of Emmett Till that happened the year before in 1954. And she did not want to get up. She got arrested. She was a church woman. They met in a church. They got a church man who was studying in Boston University to get his PhD by the name of Martin Luther King, who was in the church, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And guess what? It all started, the whole civil rights movement, the source of it, I saw water in the church. It started in the church. Oh, y'all not hearing me. And they took church songs and they modified the church songs, the same way Martin Luther, the great church reformer, took a mighty fortress as our God and